Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Hammer Museum. I'm Claudia Bester. I'm the Director of Public Programs here at the Hammer, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to tonight's conversation on queer representation in film and television, among other things, with Sarah Schulman and Carolyn Strauss. Sarah Schulman, yeah, woo! They're amazing. Sarah Schulman is the author of more than 20 works of fiction, nonfiction, and theater, and the producer and screenwriter of several feature films. In fact, I just got to read this amazing screenplay she wrote about Carson McCullers and her trans identity. Highly recommend. Needs an agent to shop it around. Someone should come and do that. And of course, we also know that she's a really important major public intellectual. She's a longtime activist for queer rights and female empowerment, and she's the co-director of the groundbreaking ACT UP Oral History Project. She co-produced the 2012 documentary United in Anger, A History of ACT UP, which we screened here at the Hammer. And her most recent book is also about the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, Let the Record Show, A Political History of ACT UP New York, 1987 to 1993. This book won the 2022 Lambda Literary Award for Nonfiction. It was a finalist for the Penn Galbraith Award, was named a Notable Book of 2021 by the New York Times, and a Best Book of 2021 by NPR, The Guardian, and New York Magazine. And Schulman's also a distinguished professor of humanities at the City College of New York's College of Staten Island. She's been a fellow at the New York Institute of Humanities, a recipient of multiple fellowships from the MacDowell Colony, Yaddo, and the New York Foundation for the Arts. She's also the co-founder of the Mix New York LGBT Experimental Film and Video Festival and serves on the advisory board of Jewish Voice for Peace. Now, Carolyn Strauss's official bio describes her as a television executive and producer, but that is totally the understatement of the year. She is a super producer. She was the president of HBO's entertainment division until 2008 and was responsible for commissioning hit series like The Sopranos, The Wire, 6 Feet Under, Curb Your Enthusiasm, and Sex and the City. After leaving the position, she became a television developer and producer and has a production deal with HBO. And since then, she's produced the series Treme, Game of Thrones, Luck, Chernobyl, The Last of Us, and Somebody Somewhere. What a resume. I mean, to die for. Amazing. Anyway, so tonight, as I said, Carolyn and Sarah will talk about how queer stories have been told in film and television so far and what stories are still to be told. After their conversation, I want to invite you all to join me in the lobby for coffee, tea, and cookies, and we'll have copies of Sarah's new book for sale and a book signing and more opportunity to talk about these issues. So let's let them get to it. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Sarah Schulman and Carolyn Strauss.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
I'm going to ask questions, and then you're going to ask questions, so plot your questions. Carolyn, thank you so much for doing this.
Sarah, thank you for having me.
I'm very happy to be with you. So we have some things in common. 2 Jewish lesbians who are pretty smart.
Shocking.
With very good-looking girlfriends. But we have taken very different paths in life. And we've both made, I think, significant contributions in very different ways.
I can't speak to mine, but I'll speak to yours.
Okay.
Yes. Kudos.
So I think we'll start with the origin stories. How did you get to where you are? If you can just tell us how you made some key decisions in your life.
Which decisions exactly?
about where you wanted to work, what kind of work you wanted to do, and how you became so successful and a woman with real power?
Well, truthfully, I didn't have a clue. You know, I graduated from school. I didn't know what I wanted to do. Maybe I'll make documentaries. Maybe I'll go to law school. So I decided to temp. And I temped around New York City, and I found a job at HBO, and I was like, well, this is not bad, and I stuck around.
Okay, that is not a complete story.
Well, it's kind of the long and the short of it.
Well, you went to Harvard,
Yeah.
and you studied history.
And literature.
And literature, okay. So you already came out with some kind of point of view.
Well, yeah, embryonic as it was, you know. Yeah, I liked stories, you know. I always liked stories. And I like to read, I like to watch. And so I mean, honestly, I had temped so much around New York City that when I got to HBO, I was like, wow, this is interesting. These people are smart, this place is interesting, and on we went.
So how did you get into the process of selecting or proposing
Inch
ideas?
by inch.
Yeah.
You know, I just did one job. I did all the jobs that people didn't want to do. Who wants to do the Joe Piscopo show? Silence. I'll do it. You know, that kind of thing. So I just took the opportunity to learn wherever I could. And, you know, you stick around long enough people come and go, and get to be in a decision-making spot.
Okay, but so what was your first idea that
She's like a dog with a bone.
Because you know how things work, and we want to know. And I know that you figured out how things work, but also you're part of how things work. So what was your first real idea for a television show, and what happened to that idea? Did it become a reality?
You know, honestly, I can't. I'm sure I had a million ideas, and none of them happened. The only idea I actually really had that was anything was 6 Feet Under. You know, let's be honest. You're most as a television executive, most of the time you're just dealing with you're as good as the people who come in the door. You know, by and large. But 6 Feet Under was one where I thought, oh, this isn't, everybody dies, everybody has to confront death. This is interesting. And this guy, Alan Ball, would be an interesting person to tell that story. But everything else is somebody else's idea that I just held on tight.
Okay, well, since our subject is queer representation, 6 Feet Under does have queer characters. Mm-hmm. So tell us, what were you able to do with those characters? What was not possible to do? How did that come to be?
I don't think that. You throw an idea out there and you let the creator run with it. And Alan Ball was the creator who happened to be gay, and that was a story he wanted to tell. But I don't think there was anything in the telling of that story that he couldn't do. I don't think there was anything that he wanted to do with those guys that he didn't, or at least that he expressed. I mean, maybe in his darkest heart of hearts he did, but I didn't know it.
Okay, so now this...
I'm not. I feel that you're frustrated with me.
No, we're going to get there. So the question is it that the people who want to do what's acceptable to do get to do it? Or is it that if you're a certain person, you can really do whatever your idea is regarding queer representation?
Okay, I'm trying to follow this.
Okay, like if you said, and I hope someday you do really soon, I want to do something as politically and socially and emotionally and psychologically complex and historically contextualized as Chernobyl, but about queer people. Could you make that happen?
I think I cannot make that happen by myself. I would need somebody who's a storyteller to tell that story. I'm somebody who can help storytellers tell their stories, but I am not the architect of those stories. So I think it's about finding the storytellers to tell those stories. Are you challenging me to do that?
I would love it if you would do that. But Oh, so let me tell my origin story.
Okay, yes. What's
And
your
we can see
origin
that
story?
what brought us to these
What are
two
the
seasons.
decisions you made?
So, for some very stupid reason, in 1984, when I published my first novel, I decided that from the beginning of my career, I was going to be openly lesbian in every possible way in my work, and that my characters were going to be just like the people I knew, who were not represented anywhere.
This is someone who has her eye on the dime all the time, clearly.
And I thought, you know, I'll become a writer, and I'll keep doing this, and the world will get used to it, and these books will go on and have this other kind of life. So I did that book, and lesbians really liked it, but nobody else knew about it. Then I did another book called Girls, Visions, and Everything. It came out in 1986. And lesbians loved that book, but no one else ever heard of it. And then I wrote this book called After Dolores in 1988. It was published by a corporate press, and it got a rave review in the New York Times. And I thought, it's going to happen. Any second now, this is going to be a movie, this is going to be a TV show, this is going to be something. And it never, ever happened. And all these years, I've now published 20 books, I've written all these plays, and they're about lesbian adults with complex, funny, sexy, psychological, contextualized lives, and nothing has ever been able to go to screen. And I look at my peers, and it's the same. But books, it can happen, but in theater and television, it can't. And what is the difference? In indie film, it can happen, right? And probably we all love Bound, right? But there's not that much commercial film in which it can happen. So what is the problem with lesbian adults? And why can't we get represented in a broader way?
I mean, you know, all of the mediums, the media that you are describing are all, you know, it's a low-cost entry, right?
Yes,
so they're not
exactly.
writing. So once you get up into making television and studio films, you're talking big money. You know, you got to plunk down big money. So will those stories generate big profits? I think that's always where people assume it goes.
So when they're, okay, I understand that, but so when they're assuming that you can do a show like Looking on HBO or Transparent on Amazon or Pose, but it can't happen with adult lesbian characters. Why is it that that's the content that everyone already assumes is not going to make any money?
I don't know.
You don't know.
I don't have the answers.
Okay, well, before I ask you how we can change that, I have some other questions. This something about actors being out of the closet. Now, do you think that it makes a difference if, especially actresses, are out of the closet? Does that help us move content forward?
Well, I think it's not an isolated thing, right? I think that content, generally actors are not, certain people, generating the content as much. You know, writers, directors. There are actors who have, a great authorial input in what they're doing, but by and large, those are with directors and writers. And so I think actors being out of the closet, I think it helps move society forward in a way, but I don't know. And I guess in the wake of that comes content. So the pointy tip of the spear, as they say.
So you think it could?
Ultimately, yes.
Ultimately, okay. So you've made, some of the most important television that's ever been made in the history of the world. And some of the things that I respect the most, like Chernobyl, which I think is absolutely incredible, and all kinds of incredible work.
Thank you.
So what do we have to do to get our lives to be included in that level of quality and depth?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure I 100% know the answer to that. I think it's, where would you point to an example of where you see, I mean, Chernobyl is like a huge catastrophic event that happened to not just, the USSR, but the world. So I don't think it's fair to put things on that sort of, to make that equivalency. But I think it's just about everyday lives of people. And what would you point to as something you go, like, I want that for us?
I'm glad you asked. I think that there's a lot of different potential strategies, right? So if you're looking for like the historic cataclysm, obviously we have it, the AIDS crisis. And
there you go.
And when I look at television about very young people, like shows like Industry or Euphoria, they depict young people as very nihilistic and kind of lost in drugs and all this kind of stuff. But when I go around the world and meet very young people, this current generation is really political. I mean, they're doing all of this union organizing, all this campus organizing. They're like people who want to change the world. So it seems like that story would be very relevant to very young people who are less homophobic, actually, than older people. So if you're looking for historic cataclysm, that's an example.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And I will say that I have tried on that one. I haven't cracked the nut yet, but I aim to. I mean, I think it's really, I think part of the challenge with this is finding people who actually write and direct this stuff, who can create those things of moment and importance, and so I'll go out with an idea and I will try to realize it, and I fail way more often than I succeed. So I will say that I have tried on that score, as Blinks can attest, but hopefully, we'll keep pecking away at that egg, and someday it'll hatch.
Okay, well, I'm glad to hear that. So that's one strategy. Another strategy is to look at a moment in American history where the emblematic American is a lesbian or a gay person. So, for example, to tell the story of the Blacklist or of the post-war period, but the main protagonist. So we're re-looking at history through the eyes of queer people.
Well, first of all, you have to hit the industry at a moment when they're interested in doing something, period, which they are not. They'll tell you over and over again. But I don't take that, while it's somewhat discouraging, I think you have to keep doing the stuff that you believe in and see what happens. But I agree with you. I mean, I think finding that the person who comes in and says, I'm really passionate about this story and I want to tell it through these eyes, it's finding the right mix of material and storyteller.
Okay. And
that's on me.
That's very optimistic, and I like that answer too. And then there's the third strategy, which is taking a famous person and queering them. Like we were talking backstage about how much we both love Carson McCullers, right? And I've been writing about Carson McCullers for years. I had a play at Playwrights Horizons about her. And there's these people, when you really look at her, you can see a queer person or a trans person or a non-binary person in her work and in her life. And if we could take someone that the culture already agrees is important and relook at them in this lens, it seems like that's another strategy.
What does it mean to queer something? Does it mean to take a sort of look at it through that lens, or take somebody who is not queer and make them queer?
Well, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Like George Washington.
Yeah, I like it. I'll put it in my time machine.
Or like cowboys. I mean, wasn't that clearly men who were running
Mountain, you mean?
Well, but I mean, don't you think that a lot of those cowboys were gay? I mean, don't you think that they were leaving the East to avoid having to get married, and they were in these all-male environments? Like, so maybe it's time for the gay Western.
You're very enthusiastic, and I like that.
So we agree that these things they're possible.
Everything is possible.
Okay, so now I want to just change the subject a second. So there's a rumor out there that television is afraid of what's happening in this country, which we're all afraid of. I call it the new confederacy of dunces, right? These states with banned books and anti-abortion, and you are the president of the board of Planned Parenthood for LA. I just want to say, amazing. Thank you for that. And you know, Florida's made yoga illegal in the public schools. I mean, these people are crazy.
Is that true? Yoga?
Yeah. So is television, the rumor is that television wants those red state viewers and that they are less likely to take things with gay content now, buying it right now, than they were a few years ago. Do you think that's true?
I don't know if that is true. I think, you know, if you look at Uncoupled or, you know, truthfully, I don't watch that much, but I'm sure there's a lot of other stuff that's out there. Sex education, or I don't know.
No,
but
things that
I don't
are being
know. I don't
sold right
honestly
now.
know. I mean, honestly, I think I'm not just humored, I don't think, by my colleagues, but I think gay-themed stuff, because something is gay-themed doesn't mean that we wouldn't take it out and we wouldn't try and sell it. And I don't think, if it was a really good story, well told, that we wouldn't sell it. But maybe I'm Pollyanna-ish.
Well, it's not, would they buy, do you know of anything with lesbian or gay protagonists that has sold in the last year?
Well, I will preface this by saying I am a very spotty reader of the trades, so I don't know. But I think in the last year, I don't know. But I know, you know, there's stuff that I work on, Somebody Somewhere, premiering Sunday night on HBO, you know, which prominently features characters all across the spectrum, that gets a lot of kudos. So I maybe, again, I think maybe I'm just sunny side up, but I refuse to believe that they won't get sold for that.
Okay. Oh, we have Bridget is here. Yay, Bridget. Thank you.
Shameless plug, sorry.
And I know that the new season starts on Sunday. You know, I look at, because I watch the show and I love it so much, and it's all these downtown New York actors, and you put them in Kansas.
Where
right?
they belong.
And it's and I'm like, it's like the open-hearted Lost, you know? It's like the Lost for the rest of us. Yeah. Okay, so another question. So we're about to have a writer's strike.
Yes.
And it's probably going to go on it's going to be a brutal one, and the demands are necessary but hard to meet. It could have a big impact on television. Do you think it could make television more conservative than it already is?
I think it'll bring more reality shows than there already are. Well, I like some of my reality shows, I don't mind telling you.
Well, I like Indian matchmaking. But.
Yeah, Indian matchmaking is good, and all my cooking shows, and, you know, but, yeah, I don't know. I don't know that it will have a political rebound, but maybe, you know, again, sunny side up.
Well, do you think it could open up new possibilities for indie film features, since there's no such thing as indie television, and give those voices a chance to surface again?
If they're not a member of the union, if these voices are not union members, yes.
Okay. Okay, so let's open it up to you guys and see what kind of questions you have for Carolyn or for me. Yes.
Hi, Carolyn. Two questions related to each other. I'm curious to know how your working relationship with Craig Mazin developed, the writer and producer.
Oh, you would have to bring up that sore spot. No, I'm
Okay.
teasing. I love Craig.
And then also in The Last of Us, how the Ellie character's romantic relationship developed as one of the real emotional highlights of the show.
Romantic relationship. Oh, you mean in terms of the retrospective? Yeah. I knew Craig socially, and he came to me with the idea for Chernobyl. And he told a really great story, and I was like, yeah, let's see if we can sell it. And HBO felt the same way I did, and thus our relationship was born. And I think he basically, in terms of the Ellie character, he was jumping off from the game, and almost everything that is in the show is something that was either developed or planted seed from the game. So he just took that and went to its logical place.
Follow-up?
No, I guess I'm also just interested to hear your, I think the working relationship that you have has produced some of the best television in the last, I don't know how many years.
Oh, thank you.
So, yeah.
Thank you very much. I will say I just grab onto Craig's coattails and hold on tight, so I give it all to him.
Yes?
Sonny, if you must.
While we're on that show, I'd like to know about episode 3 and when that episode,
Shocker.
did you know, like, how early in the conversation did that happen?
Very.
If you had not been the producer, do you think it would have happened?
Craig, one of the things that I say in this moment right now, which is not necessarily popular, but I think is true, that one of the best hours of, I think, and depictions of a gay relationship was written by a straight guy, albeit a straight guy who loves show tunes, but a straight guy. Yes, Craig from the beginning was dead set on doing that episode. I mean, he was really excited about it, and we talked about it a lot. We talked a lot about the casting, and that was, I think, some of the things that really excited him about the series as a whole was these sort of little, day trips that we could take away from little seeds that were planted in the game. Like that relationship was not explored at all in the game. And he was, from the beginning, that was something he was really excited to write. So I think had I never been born, that relationship would still be on television.
I agree. I would say, though, just knowing you and knowing your art, and looking at all the other shows that you've been a part of, I'm not sure that moment would have, that episode, like, you clearly spoke about it, so, like, I'm not would it, we could all sort of wonder, would it have been as good if it had not, if it had been another straight, no?
I can't say because that's a hypothetical, Sonny. I don't entertain hypotheticals. but listen, I'm really proud of that episode. I think it's beautiful. I cry every time I watch it. And yeah, so I don't know what would have been, but thank you. I appreciate that.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Could you please wait for the microphone?
Hi, I'm sort of interested in this question that Sarah asked about a concern for an actor's identity sort of aligning with the identity of a character, and I wanted to hear a bit more about this public concern of there being a demand for there to be a fidelity between the identities of an actor and a character, like, oh, we should cast a trans woman in the role of a trans woman, rather than giving that opportunity to a straight woman, or sorry, a cis woman. And I think a sort of connected question to that is the role of criticism, or just like public discourse plays when you formulate your ideas about your work for both of you, when you decide what to write about or what decisions to greenlight.
Well, I'll start with the actor question. I think in all, by and large, the ability to cast, especially in oppressed groups, being able to cast, if there's a role of a trans woman and having a trans woman play that, is obviously, the way to go. However, the other side of that coin would be that same trans woman couldn't play a cis woman, and I wonder, is that, how to play those sides? Because I sort of, I guess in my heart of hearts, I believe that art is art, and artists should be able to do whatever art they want to do. You should be able to write what you want to write and play what you want to play. But I also do recognize that underrepresented groups need to be they need much more representation. So I would agree with that I would absolutely want a trans man or a trans woman to play a trans man or a trans woman. But I am wary of the flip side of that coin, which is saying a trans man or a trans woman couldn't play a cis man or a cis woman. So I think once we start dictating what must be, then it cuts people out, ultimately.
I have so much to say about that question and so many different ways to come to it.
Are you going to fight with me?
Not yet.
Okay.
So, let's take the question of tar, for example. So, excuse me, what's the matter? Okay. If lesbians writing movies about lesbian life could be produced on that level, and there were 15 of them, and then there was that one, it would be a different story. But when you have a story about a woman having more power than any woman on earth has, except Carolyn Strauss, and then she's just as bad as men, which you're not, then it's a fake out. It's a mind fuck.
I agree with that. I mean, I do think that there is, when you're dealing with a sliver, that there is an unfair weight on that sliver to represent, to be the best, to be sort of, I think we're not asking to be superhuman, just human. But I think all the sides of humanity are not so pretty. So where do you draw the line?
Well, the issue is not that there is a straight man who can write a really great gay character. I'm sure that that's true. The problem is when lesbians are not allowed to represent ourselves. And the work that we're writing and the perspective that we represent can't get up there, stays in this subcultural frame. And often it's because it's a counter to the dominant culture's view of us. So when our authentic representation feels unfamiliar, because there's a confusion, I think, in entertainment between quality and familiarity. And people think if something is familiar, it's good, and if it's unfamiliar, it's bad. And it's not. It's the stuff that's unfamiliar is the stuff that we need. So in that realm, I would say that. I wrote this piece, back to Carson McCullers. I wrote this piece in The New Yorker about Carson McCullers called White Writer. And when she published Hard as a Lonely Hunter in 1940, Richard Wright reviewed it for The Nation, and he said, this is the first time that a white writer wrote black characters that are truly human. And she grew up in segregated Georgia. And she has scenes in her work in which there's only black people in the room, right? So a white person can never be in the room when there's only black people in the room. So there was something that she was able to understand or transcend that was so beyond her time, it's beyond our time, even now. And that is remarkable. So I would never want to say that she can't write that, even if Richard Wright thinks it's great. But the problem is that when you don't have equal access to representation, Black people are misrepresented every day. And that's true for us as well. So that's where the struggle comes in. Now, unfortunately, some of the corrective doesn't work. So for example, in the New York theater, you'll see that so a lot of people have never been represented, right? Women have never been represented. Lesbians haven't been represented. People of color, it's been a white man's game, the New York theater. And now they're like, okay, we're going to let these other people, but they're picking people. 80% of what they're picking represents the exact same values and aesthetics as the white men. So what's the point? What's the point of filling theaters with mediocre plays by women and people of color? What is the point of that? The point is to allow the people who are really exciting and have the fire to get their work up there. But there's a problem then, because once you do that, once you change the criteria, you have to look back retrospectively. And you have to say, wow, we excluded all these women and gay people and people of color for all these years. And now when we look back, we can see that we elevated so many white men whose work was crap. And that's what they can't do, is go back and reevaluate the canon and who was allowed in. So that's why it's so hard for criteria to actually change. Anyway, that's just the beginning of my answer. I could go on.
So you're sunny side down.
No. I'm a bigger optimist than you because I keep going no matter what.
Yeah.
Because I believe it can change.
I like that.
All right. Yes, hi.
What if the next generation just straight up doesn't care whether it's okay for them to be represented? What if this whole new age of media comes to a place where everybody has their own pet AI to help them become their own mini producers and tell their own stories and not have to worry about gates that are open or closed? Like, what does that world look like? The world where there aren't like a bunch of gatekeepers and every single person's story is epic. I mean, there are amazing people like in this room who are doing great things, but there's like so many that aren't.
No.
And what does that future look like? Any advice?
I don't
on
agree
that?
with your assessment of younger people. I'm a teacher. Younger people are desperate to have something that's authentic be out there in the world. And the repetition of of falsity is driving, I think, people crazy, at least students.
I think my question is, they are the most authentic thing that there is, and why can't they just tell their own stories? Like, I don't, it's
on social media.
No, just in general, a whole different kind of media. Like, why can't we just, like, I don't know, is that...
You are blowing my mind.
Okay, I'll stop.
I'm sure that's going to happen. Certainly it's starting to happen. We'll see what happens.
Maybe the strike will collapse television and it'll come to...
And it'll just be a lot of AI stories being told.
It's just a question for Sarah. Wow. Pleasure to me. I wish I was as schooled as everybody who's probably watched all of your television shows. I love that you point out 6 Feet Under. It literally changed my life. But in just the snapshot of like learning tidbits about both of you, it was really poignant that you talked about how you've written all these pieces, and I feel like you're very selective, and none of them caught fire as far as production goes. And being queer, and I love calling myself a faggot. Like, it's like something I hold really pridefully. So I love being a faggot, and John Waters has totally has been somebody I've looked towards and have learned so much through films like that, as crass and naughty and whatever. And these B-movie films, these like terrible films, but they were so educational, and there's never been a vein that is something lesbian, something that is about the embodiment of being like more feminine bent, queer, like that. It's always like...
You mean the female John Waters?
Yes.
Well, there's a huge thing of underground lesbian cinema that's experimental film and indie and small budget. There's a lot of it.
Please
please make a list? May I email you and
Well,
ask
I
you
get to say,
school me?
I
in
wrote
some
2
way?
films that Cheryl Dunye directed.
I would love to watch them. Can they just do a projection of them? Because I personally don't know them.
I'm
I don't
telling
know-
you right now.
I don't know how to
Okay,
get to
I'm going
them.
to tell you.
Please,
Okay.
thank you.
So I wrote 2 films for Cheryl that she directed. One is called The Owls. It's whatever. But we
Owls.
made a porn film,
Yes.
and it's called Mommy is Coming.
Wow. My mom doesn't come, so that's great.
You can find it. It's deep, deep, deep online somewhere. But this guy named Jürgen Bruning, we had a film in the Berlinale, the Berlin Film Festival, and he came up to us and he's like, I am a queer porn producer. Do you want to make a queer porn film? We said, okay. So I studied all these porn movies, and then I wrote this movie that was really funny. It was just like slamming doors and hotel rooms and mistaken identity, and it had 7 classic porn scenes. So I wrote it, and Cheryl went to Berlin to shoot it. And then she calls me from Berlin, and she's like, Schulman, bad news. Germans aren't funny.
I could have told you that.
So she shot the whole thing, and I went to LA, and we looked at it, and it was like horrible. Not funny. All the jokes flat, but the sex scenes were great. So like we would say like 3-way bondage, and they would go, and it would be amazing. So we had to cut all the acting scenes. And we had to put in filler. Anyway, you can find it somewhere.
Well, I mean, I do think there is a kind of a rap out there that lesbians aren't funny. So, you gotta jump that hurdle.
But it's not true, and that's the problem.
I would agree.
They think that we're
I'm
boring.
hilarious.
They think that we're drag and mean, but we're not, and that's why they won't. Like.
But I think that one of the things that's kind of interesting is that there is a whole school of kind of camp humor that is exclusively a gay man's humor. That women don't generally. I mean, there have been a ton of funny lesbos, but we don't really have that rap of being
But are
funny.
assimilated gay men still camp, or is that a generational thing?
Well, I was responding to John Waters, really.
Oh,
Generational.
because assimilation is not funny.
Yeah, you beat all the humor out of it.
A question. Oh,
Yeah, so I guess this is to both of you. When can we look forward to a series drawing on stories from Let the Record Show?
Yeah, I'd love to know the answer to that question. It's been optioned by Concordia, Jonathan King, and Christine Vachon at Killer Films, and they got a showrunner, Andrew Haig, if you know him. He wrote a classic.
Hilarious.
Yes, but I don't know. It hasn't clicked. So
It's really fucking hard to create a show that really works, and it's an area I have tried to crack myself. But I think it's finding a voice and putting that voice in the mouths of characters that are credible and sustainable is really hard. So, it takes a while.
well, that's
hopefully
not where
we'll
it
get
hasn't clicked. It hasn't clicked in terms of selling it.
Oh, you think it's good on the page? You think it's good on the page? I haven't read it. I have no idea.
But anyway,
But you like what you
hoping it
read.
will happen. Hoping it will happen.
Have you read a script?
No, there's no script. There's a pitch. There's a deck.
Oh, everybody's got a deck.
Anyway, I'm not, I'm just the writer. I don't know. They have meetings. I don't know what they talk about. They go out and take it out. And then eventually someone tells me what happened.
I actually really believe that if there was a really, I've spent a number of years trying to crack something of that. If there was a really good version of it, I think it would sell. I really do, because I think it embodies so many of the themes that are resonant now.
I agree with you, and I am going to ask Christine to call you tomorrow. Okay.
I will take her phone call.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I had a question about. Can I? Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. Who's
Over
Rory?
Over here to the house left.
Oh yeah.
Question for both of you about the calculus of
what's realistic, and especially in relationship to power, and that I think you both have obviously had very long, hardworking careers and occupied positions of power in different ways, and also have your frustrations within those positions. And I'm curious about what it means to inhabit that logic of like, this is realistic or this isn't realistic to happen, and how you feel like access to power means trying to push against what people say is realistic or unrealistic, and how much positions of power mean navigating practically the sort of landscape of what's realistic or not. So
Is that Agnes?
yeah.
Hi, Agnes Berinsky,
How are you?
playwright. Okay.
I don't even know how to answer that question. I think, I mean, for me, I don't really, I think when I was a network executive, I thought about that a lot more because, you know, I had to work against a whole machine of like, is marketing going to like this? Or are these people going to like this? But I think, to me, that was always an exercise. What I always went back to was, do I like it? Do I respond to these stories? Do I respond to these characters? And that's still kind of my beacon. And I generally believe, if I really believe in something and really respond to what it's about and how the story's being told, then other people will too. But like I said, you know, sometimes I'm wrong.
I mean, every step of my life, I've been told that what I'm doing is not going to happen. So I've been always told that everything is not realistic. And I've had a lot of books that I've had to wait sometimes 10 years. I mean, Conflict is Not Abuse, right? That book. Nobody in the entire United States would publish it. I mean, nobody, not the lowest press that you never heard of and can't pronounce their name, like nobody. And I had to publish it with a queer press in Vancouver, Canada. And I thought it was going to die.
You said that with such derision.
And, you know,
Canada.
and we sold 40,000 copies out of Vancouver, Canada, and it's been translated into 3 languages. So it's like you only lose if you quit. And sometimes, you know, I mean, now I'm 64. I don't have a lot of 10 years, you know, ahead of me to like wait for things, but you just have to persist because they will always tell you that nothing's can ever change. And it's the people who are invested in things the way they are who tell you that nothing can ever change. And you have to prove them wrong. It's brutal.
Thanks.
Dudley.
So I want to get back to lesbianism. So,
who doesn't?
well, and this is a sort of a complicated question because one thing I've noticed is that for I don't know, a number of years now, there've been a lot of female protagonists, sometimes they're girl power oriented things, but you know, there's a lot more female protagonists of power than we've had for a long time. But it's not extending to lesbians. Whereas recently we just, had I think a thriller come out that the lead characters just happened to be a gay male couple. And it was kind of not the point that they were gay, but it was allowed to exist. And it made me think that something I was told, my agent yelled at me one time because I wrote a book, and she said, the readers for this kind of thing are aspirational readers. So the protagonist must be something you can aspire to. Well, that makes sense for all these female protagonists. But I wonder, is the fact that they are lesbians just like a bridge too far, that nobody wants to aspire to be a lesbian, or they believe that most viewers won't want to aspire? That's kind of the question.
It's a good question. I honestly don't know the answer to that question. I think, there are really good lesbian writers out there. And hopefully, I'm working with some now. And hopefully, when these projects sort of get their wings, that there'll be people who want to buy them. I don't know. I think for someone in my position who's like, now I'm on the selling side as opposed to the buying side, I just respond to the stories that I'm hearing and hope that people want to buy them. And I think, all I can do is nurture the writers and hope that people respond to the stories. And I just firmly believe that good stories, well told, will somehow find their way out.
Okay, I look at it a little differently. So my experience is that it's very hard for some people to universalize to a lesbian protagonist, even if it's a good story well told. Because why would you want to identify with somebody who's so much lower than you in terms of their social position and their social value? And I think that is the thing to overcome. So,
Well, I just wonder, I mean, well, that would mean basically, in your telling, that only straight white men stories would be told.
no, but I mean, now we're learning as a culture, white people are learning to identify with a black protagonist. But and there's more black people in publishing, and there's more contracts going to black writers than there's ever been. And so the publishing industry is telling white people, this is what we're going to be giving you, so learn how to identify with it. And that makes a big difference. The way the apparatus treats the material is internalized by the viewer, I feel.
Yes, I think that's true, but I still have to, I guess I have to keep believing that people not just want stories about people who they perceive as more powerful, more privileged, and with more access than themselves.
Unless it's Succession. Whatever.
For me, I was like, well, it's the same people, it's the same story over and over and over again.
It was so weird can we talk about Succession for a minute?
Go right ahead.
Okay, so it's a world of everyone's white and everyone's straight. There's not one gay person in that world. But I don't care about that. What I object to
Obviously you do.
It's all about them fucking each other over, and that's the soap opera. But in real life, they're fucking us over, and that's not what the show is showing us. So there's something, the actors are incredible, but it's this, what is the authorial point of view? I feel like the authorial point of view identifies with these people in some way.
Well, I don't know Jesse personally, but I've heard he's a really nice guy.
Can I follow up a little bit?
Yeah, it's ugly.
I'm sorry. You know a lot of lesbian writers out there. It sounds like they're really good ones. They're good ones, but it sounds like they're not bringing you a lot of stories that have a lot of amazing lesbian protagonists, and amazing stories. And I'm wondering how much is self-censorship going on, like what they're not putting their time into.
Oh, I think a lot.
Okay.
Yeah. I think
Should they
there's a
stop
lot
that?
of
I mean, is there more? You think there is possibility of more openness if they would bring it to you?
Yeah.
Maybe
I mean,
it would happen.
I have, I mean, I have a couple of things in the pipeline that do deal with those stories. They're not necessarily pretty lesbian stories, but they're human and they're real.
Yeah, but nobody wants, I mean, the tyranny of positive images is over a long time ago, I think, when it comes to
I hope you're
lesbian
right.
content. I think it was over in the 80s.
I just wanted to, I'm thinking of three great movies, well told. Philadelphia, Carol, and Brokeback Mountain. Okay, so all of those actors are straight. Who cares? I think that you have to have great acting. You have to have great artists to tell a story, and it was very effective, powerful, especially Brokeback Mountain. I was just wanted to circle back on that because I feel like there's a rigidity you're talking about and great acting, great stories, that's what's important. Can you respond to that?
Sure. I mean, I don't think that just gay people should play gay part. I'm not of that school. I really hate Philadelphia because, it's like the guy, it's a gay lawyer who has AIDS and he needs a lawyer. Why does he go to a homophobic lawyer? in real life, he would go to a gay lawyer. That's who people went to. So the whole conceit of the whole thing, it doesn't make any sense. That's my objection to that. I think the best, I love Carol, and I think the best performance in it is by Sarah Paulson.
Gay, gay, gay.
Now, she's a wonderful actress, and she's a person who's been able to be out and be whoever she is and play all kinds of roles. She plays, because she's very sexy, and she can play straight, gay, whatever, and she's very flirtatious. But other actresses who, if they come out, they get stuck in the nuns, the sister, and, you know, the virgin next door.
Obviously, you're talking about Cherry Jones.
One of our great actresses, but... Yeah, and there's a few others also in that position. So I think, you know, it's harder for actresses to come out in terms of their career trajectories, don't you think?
Well, it used to be way harder. It's not. I mean, now it's way less hard. You gotta say, it's way less hard than it used to be.
Well, I think it depends on if they're sexy in a very feminine way that men can respond to. They have a better chance professionally.
Well, that's the business.
That's the business.
The business is, you know, it's always been like that. But I don't think it's just men responding to that also, by the way.
True. Good point. Yes, over there.
So I thought the question about how Hollywood's self-censoring for political reasons was a very interesting one. We hear so much about the way that foreign markets are now dictating what goes on in film, particularly on the subject of queer representation, getting banned in China, getting banned in the Middle East. Do you find that to be true of television as well? Are those forces censoring what we're seeing?
Well, it's not censoring it here. You know, I think, you know, for instance, that episode 3 of The Last of Us, which is the gay episode, there was, you know, that's being censored in some places in the Middle East, for instance. But I don't think that determines what happens here.
Anybody else?
So I just saw, I don't know, very recently, like within the last couple of weeks, By Hook or By Crook again.
Oh, yes.
Brilliant film. Like
Silas Howard and
Harry Dodge
right.
and Steakhouse. Yeah.
I'm ignorant.
And it really stood up, like the writing, the acting, and I was blown away by how it is about class and about mental health. Without talking about those things, there wasn't language for trans identity, but it had this gender fluidity in it. And I'm wondering, with what you're talking about now, like quality acting, quality writing, if it came out now, do you think it would be picked up? Would it have a different life than this very small underground indie life it had 20 years ago when it came out, 23 years, whatever?
I must confess my ignorance. I have never seen it.
Okay.
So I cannot say.
What do you think, Sarah?
I don't know. It's,
Okay.
I mean, a lot of, you know, some independent underground films are always going to be better than commercial films because they're just can be truer and they're also formally more engaging. Yeah.
The more money people spend on stuff, the more input other people have on it, and you know, the more diluted things get generally.
I'm very curious about, well, I believe that there is a sort of social contract coming about in this idea that the underrepresented are responsible to represent themselves. And that's not to say that I'm not, at least personally, not all for like representation starts by being in the room, but the responsibility is lessened on those who are not marginalized. And so I'm curious about your thoughts on how we encourage allyship in collaborators and allyship in personas of power that are giving these audiences.
Well, it's a really good question because I think there is a feeling that for me as a white female producer, should I be, the one shepherding a black film or a black story or a black film, TV show, whatever. And I think the prevailing feeling right now is that that is not my place to do that. So there is that kind of catch-22 that you're talking about in terms of allyship and fostering new voices and sort of underrepresented voices, and how those, if sort of the dominant class are all the gatekeepers, then how do you open the gates for less represented voices? And I think it's really one of the thorny questions to be unwound.
Thank you both. This has been delightful, and also to all the people you know in the audience, which appears to be a large number of people. It makes it feel very cozy. Can you give us some outtakes of like queer shows over the decades that almost made it, or that didn't even close to make it, or just things that, maybe you have to be a little bit vague, but things that almost happened along the way, or that should have happened along the way?
The Gay Sopranos? I don't know.
I know one.
What was that?
Mattachine, the Eric Cervini's book about Mattachine that was runner-up for the Pulitzer Prize, was bought by Amazon, and the showrunner is the guy who wrote The Inheritance, Matthew Lopez, but they never greenlit the writer's room.
Yeah, that word, I think your question is a really good question, but it requires me to have a more encyclopedic knowledge than I do.
Well, if there's nothing left, then I'm going to ask you what you're working on now, and then I'm going to tell you what I'm working on now.
I'm working on season 3 of Somebody Somewhere. Yeah. Season 2 of The Last of Us. And a bunch of, I would say in utero things that need a little while to go before they're born.
So my next 2 things are plays. I've been working with the composer Anthony Davis on a musical adaptation of my novel Shimmer, which is about the post-war period in New York, 1947. And we worked for a number of years, and we couldn't get anywhere. And then 2 years ago, Anthony won a Pulitzer for an opera about the Central Park Five. And the system was like, oh my God, a senior black classical composer that we've been ignoring, let's get him. So he's had every door open, and he's having an opera about Malcolm X at the Met in the fall. And Yale called, and they're like, what have you got? And he's like, I've got Shimmer. So we have a workshop in May with 21 singers, and it's very exciting, very, very, very exciting. And then
Did you write the book?
I wrote the book based on my book. And then I have a play about the true story of the Roe v. Wade case, which is a fascinating story that has not been told. And it's going to be at the Provincetown Theater, not this summer, but next summer, directed by Lisa Peterson, who is currently directing the Sean Hayes, Doug Wright play on Broadway. So those are my 2 exciting things. Oscar Levant. Well, Carolyn, thank you so much.
Sarah, thank you.
I enjoyed it.
I enjoyed it as well.
And thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.